Good morning, everyone. Well, good afternoon now. It's midday. Thank you so much if you're here live joining me for my session around burnout today. I'm talking into the void, as is always the case with these broadcast webinars. So there's an element of interaction that we lose compared to what I would normally do within workplace sessions or when I'm running workshops or any form of talk virtually. But feel free to use the chat, and if it pops up and I can see it whilst I'm in the midst of delivery, I will love to reference that. Today is going to be a jam-packed session. Super excited to get through quite a lot of content and hopefully lots of takeaways for you because burnout is a really huge topic which we all need to understand much better. Certainly, as a business owner, I run a business called 50/50, and we support companies and workplaces to build high performing cultures where people can really thrive without crashing and burning. So, really having that capacity to kind of build those sustainable habits. Now, we've had more inbound inquiries than ever before this year. We really are seeing a big shift around that prevention as opposed to people waiting for things to happen before taking action. So, today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the methodology that we might take and then really get to grips with what burnout is and what it isn't. Help you to see a little bit around the concept of how do I spot those early signs, but also know when stress is tipping a bit too far in the wrong direction? So we'll really kind of work that backwards and re-engineer it so we can understand the whole kind of stress spectrum and when it becomes too much. So, as I've mentioned, I run 50/50. I'm also known as the burnout coach online. So, I'm sort of got a bit of a following on TikTok. If you're on that platform, it's somewhere I hang out and provide lots of short nuggets, the odd meme, and helpful tools and techniques to really keep you high performing without burning out. I'm an accredited coach myself under the International Coaching Federation. And for me, it's really about elevating performance, whether you're in a sales or revenue generating area, whether you're looking to grow your own business or you're individually contributing, but thinking about it from a personal standpoint. These are the kinds of people that we love to work with at 50/50. So this, also just to give you a flavour of the type of companies we work with, we do have a broad array of different relationships with whom we're trusted by. In fact, really interesting fact for you, Nationwide became a client after exactly this webinar, which is always really good to know that there are people out there really proactively scanning for opportunities when it comes to innovative ways that we can really start to get ahead of the game when it comes to burnout. The framework that most of what we do here at 50/50 is kind of built upon and is I guess it kind of relates to is the rewire framework, something that I've designed here at 50/50. And we're going to touch on a couple of the areas today in our session. So that recognize is really big when it comes to burnout, what to recognize and how to recognize, because we want to be spotting those early signs of fatigue. We want to assess friction, and we really don't want to be seeing performance drag. So really important to think about that too. This might be also always from a personal standpoint, or just if you're looking at it from the lens of how can I support my team or wider business. And then also understanding how we can assess the information and use it, but kind of regulate those emotions earlier on. We want to be able to respond and not react within certain situations. And the regulation is a really key core component of that. So these are a couple of the parts of the rewire framework that we'll zone in on today. We might touch a little bit around workload and boundaries as well. So, if you were to just Google burnout and what it is, you're likely to see the World Health Organization definition of burnout. Now, interestingly, you'll see here it's refers specifically to something that happens within the workplace. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that. I do think the workplace has a huge role to play in it, and I think the type of company culture we're exposed to is really big when it comes to, is it a kind of helping people towards burnout, or is it helping people to not burn out? And by what I mean by this is culturally and contextually, the context within which we are working within, we need to be really mindful of it. Is it a space we feel safe as adults, as individuals, as contributors, as team leaders, as managers, to have that psychological safety in place where we feel we're able to not just keep going and to put our hand up and ask for help if things are too much? And that's obviously very much simplifying there, but just generally. And the analogy I always use is you cannot grow a mango tree in Iceland. And if we've got a culturally Icelandic landscape in which we're navigating, this is when problems can become real. But really, if we think about burnout, it's a whole body, a whole nervous system shutdown. And we're whole humans that when it comes to work, we have other parts of our lives inextricably linked within it. So to just say categorically it's a workplace phenomenon is a very interesting lens. You would be surprised to know that the number what you wouldn't be surprised to know that the number one cause of burnout globally is a toxic workplace. And more importantly, that it isn't actually seen as a mental health condition. So it's also not something that's very easy to medically diagnose. And a lot of people that present with the symptoms of burnout might find themselves, and if this is, if this is you as well, you might find that you've been there before, where you're talking to your GP and it's not really clear that they're supporting you in a way that they wouldn't already support you if you were to go there with signs or symptoms showing for depression or anxiety. And what we see a lot of the medical profession rely on questionnaires and diagnostic methods which aren't fit for purpose when it comes to burnout. So it's just something to be really mindful of, that the definition is kind of there from the World Health Organization perspective, but there's a lot more to it. And yes, we can see here that some of the biggest signs and symptoms will be that total bone crunching tiredness, really feeling depleted, exhausted. Language you might use might be like, I have nothing left to give right now. I am absolutely running on empty. And that mental distance we talk about is that you could actually be showing up as high performing, as capable, competent, getting stuff done, yet mentally you are distancing and moving yourself away from burnout, from sort of the work you're doing because of the burnout. So other things that we can see would be an increased kind of feeling of cynicism. So that negativity. If you think about yourselves when we're quite stressed generally, and I'll come on to this in the next moment, we can be quite brittle. If you think about the times when you've been most snappy or most reactive in life, it's often when we've got a lot on our plates to manage. So feelings of that negativity or being quite cynical, they can really show up quite a lot around burnout. Now, sleep is one of the first things to go when we are stressed. So our ability to decompress from the day is minimized, which means we start our mornings with still a backlog of stress that we haven't cleared. And I'll come on to some techniques in which we can use to, counteract that a bit later on in the session. But we do tend to see people who are showing that deep tiredness, that always on feeling, that never being able to switch off. There's perhaps like an element of guilt and shame around how much energy you give to your work, that feeling of not being able to switch off, always putting the laptop down but then sort of opening it back up, secretly checking the phone. There's an air of addiction when it comes to burnout, especially a type of burnout which is what we refer to as frenetic burnout, where we keep that continual push all the way through. It really is quite phenomenal actually how we're able to keep that energy going when we're in a state of burnout. And there's some neurological reasons for that, which I might touch on if we have time. So be mindful of some of the core signs and symptoms of where you might be. Physically, we tend to change as well. So it's not just a mental reaction to burnout. There's a lot of signs that we're carrying the weight of it, literally the tension in our shoulders. We might be experiencing stomach issues, stomach aches, IBS-like problems. They say the gut is a second brain, and there's a reason why there's a link there as well. Many people I've met over my career have also been exposed to situations where very high stress has led to burnout, and it's given them sort of situations around food intolerances. They might have sort of allergic reactions come out of nowhere. I think that inflammation in the body is linked. I'm not a nutritionist, but what is really clear is that there are physical manifestations. So think about those migraines or those headaches or those moments when your body is giving you every single sign it can that something is not right. So let's take a look at what we call here the pressure at the performance pressure curve. But I'm going to ask you in your heads now to imagine a stress kind of almost like a scale in your head of 0 to 10. So we need a certain amount of stress in our lives to feel to feel motivated, to have a certain element of energy to get our stuff done. Um, Otherwise, if we're too low on the spectrum, anywhere sort of between a 0 and a 2 out of 10, if you think that's the low end and 10 is the high end of stress, anywhere between a 0 and 2 is actually another type of burnout. So I've already given you one, which is frenetic burnout. But 0 to 2 out of 10 would be what we call bore out. So who knew that being bored and being stressed is actually a form of burnout in its own right? So this is where you would feel really flat, low energy, low motivation, likely very disengaged with your work, and possibly very underutilized from your competence standpoint or from your background and education. You might be doing something that's quite repetitive and very boring in nature. So that very much firmly keeps us in the unmotivated zone, but just be mindful that this in its own right is a form of burnout in itself and something that not a lot of people are aware of. Equally, as we go up this performance curve, we're obviously working towards our optimum Goldilocks moment where we're achieving our full potential with the almost perfect amount of pressure. And we need to kind of go up this curve because this is where we find the kind of performance potential. So this is where we're growing in our ability to perform. And we'll find here focus, creativity, and clarity come alive. Just noted that little typo, get that sorted. But comfort zone on the way up to our potential is like a really healthy level of stress. And if we think about that as sort of your 3 to 7 zone, so if you're thinking, where do I sit? Where am I feeling? 0 to 2 bore out, really undermotivated, understretched, under attaining. And then, well, you might actually be fully attaining in your job, but you're under attaining in your potential. And then we've got 3 to 7 would be that healthy pressure, that healthy space where it's effectively our comfort zone and it's only right at the top where we meet our potential. But then beyond that, when we start going into an 8 or a 9 or a 10 out of 10, this is where we're going from stress beginning and that kind of pressure building and compounding, leading us into a stress zone. So overwhelm might creep in here. Definitely motivation can wane. It starts to feel like it's all too much. Perhaps we're in a space of procrastination or total, what do we call it? That, oh my goodness, I've got so much to do, yet I have got no ability to know where I need to start. It's that all consuming. So that tipping point is really important to notice, to recognizing when you slip out of what would be your normal healthy range of stress and when it begins to feel like things are beginning to diminish. The reactions, the outcomes are not quite proportional to the effort you're putting in the same way that they would be. And when we leave and depart from peak performance, obviously we're not doing ourselves any favors or anyone else within us, within our working environment or in our life. So this motivation lives in this middle space, and our motivation is really key for us to get things done, right? So we can end up going further down this spectrum. And if we think about our 0 to 10 just as a flat line as well, anything around the 8, 9, or 10 is where we would end up being. If we hang out there for too long a period of time, it can become what we refer to as chronic stress. So acute stress in the moment, stuff that's going on is okay. We can cope with that. That's not going to stress us too much if we've got stressful things happening to us, if we're hanging out somewhere between 3 and 7. When we get to 8, 9, or 10 out of 10, that is where we begin to recognize that we need like an elastic band to be able to bounce back, to stretch back in, so to move back in after we've stretched out. So that movement back in is what's going to help to recalibrate, recharge, and re-energize. But the reality is when life gets going and when the proverbial hits the fan, we all get to a place where we are stretched thin, we're brittle, and we're hanging out in high stress zones for too long, which then turns into chronic stress, which is very, very close to a place of burnout if we are consistently in this zone. And burnout we can look at and think of as the fall off the cliff. So this is where we've gone beyond a place of stress and now we're in a space of burnout where for many people it can come up as if it's very much, out of the blue, but there will have been signs all along the way. Now, some of the signs are very difficult to grasp from a cognitive standpoint because when we're stressed, our nervous system perceives everything we're doing as a threat. We're not in a safe space mentally, so therefore we cannot act from our rational, intellectual brain. That part of the brain is effectively switched offline the minute we become stressed, which means we react, we don't respond. We can't think innovatively, creatively. We can't problem solve. We can't do so many things when our body and our mind do not perceive where we're at as safe. So therefore, we're in a reactive mode. We're in a space where we're not rational, where we're not able to think straight, and we don't see it. We don't see it for being in it. So actually, when you're in burnout, you can hardly, until you've hit that kind of the fall, it's really hard to notice that you're there. And so, most people don't recognize they're there until it's kind of got to a point of no return, which is why the prevention work is really, really important, because if we can avoid that place, we can avoid the fall, we're in a space where we can actually proactively do something about it. So have a quick check in with yourself. Where do you think you are in one of these three zones here? You could have a look at. You could also give yourself a number. If it's a scale of 0 to 10, and we know 0 to 2 is bore out, 3 to 7 is healthy stress, 8 to 10 is sort of high stress, chronic stress if prolonged for too long a time, and beyond 10 would definitely be the fall and actual burnout. So it's worth being mindful of that. Okay. So when we think about what can we do to know that healthy level of stress, like what tangibly can we think about? It's worth being mindful of your own reality, because my stress capacity will be different to your stress capacity, and we'll come on to that shortly. But equally, I might be able to hang out in a zone of high stress, like super high stress, without feeling it being chronic. So some people get into habitual burnout cycles. They might be hanging out there for long periods of time, but then have, a good couple of weeks to reset, recharge, and they might go again. And this can be typical in certain types of work where you have 3 weeks on of work and then you might have a couple of weeks off, or where you have that really clear earmarked time to recover. Now, reality in life is it's never as black and white as that, but we have to be mindful that are we actually tipping into strain leading to that burnout space, or are we able to withstand the pressure that we're experiencing? So you want to be hanging out in a calm space where we're thinking clearly, because our energy is balanced, we're getting the right amount of sleep, we're largely not having interrupted sleep with the kind of palpitations or the stress loops or the 3 a.m. wake ups when we've got too much on our mind. And we want to be able to have the ability to navigate short-term stress, because it will hit us in our lives. We will move house, we will get married, we will go through relationship breakdowns, we will lose our job, we will start again from fresh. Whatever it might be, we have to go through these big markers in our life. Now, we want to be able to see those as productive challenges rather than things that derail us. But when we start to feel irritable, we find that our work is scattered, focus is waning, we've got that kind of boundaries, but they're just being walked all over. That fatigue, that tiredness, that it's not just tiredness anymore, it's bone crunching exhaustion. This is the early signs that we need to look out for. because we don't want to get to that mentally distanced place where it's too hard and we've got nothing left to give, because ultimately that's really clear that is a sign that we have ignored all of the red flags, and we need to take stock and replenish very, very quickly. This is one of the best visuals I've seen for really helping to visually bring to life what we deal with day to day. It works brilliantly with a lot of the companies we partner with. We work alongside Dr. Juliet Young, and she's called the Creative Clinical Psychologist. You can see her handle there underneath, and she just brings like loads of beautiful illustrations to some really big concepts, especially around stress and burnout. So let's have a moment to think that we all have a capacity for stress, and that's what this bucket, if you want to call it the stress bucket, is representing: a space, a container in which we can hold all of the stress of our life. Now, there's always going to be a small amount of water in our bucket, because every day we're making small decisions that cause stress. Now, most stress is normal. Stress is okay. And they might be decisions around what you're having for dinner tonight. What am I going to wear tomorrow? Oh, what time is it I've got to pick up my son? Or what time is it I've got to do that for my daughter? Or what am I doing with my family this Christmas? These little points will create, they're stressors. They're not necessarily stress, but they're like the small little drops that we'll have in our tank every day. And then we have bigger things, like represented here by the bigger droplets. So this could be a big argument that kicked off in the house this morning, or something that went on at work that's quite big. You might have a looming deadline. You might be really tuning into the world events and finding, what's going on around those very, very stressful. So these add water into your bucket, which is starting to fill. And then we have something called the trauma trigger trap here, which is a really good visual addition to the fact that actually some of the situations we're exposed to, some of the relating that we're doing, some of the memories that might be evoked in our lives through our experiences can bring up stuff for us that causes stress, whether that's shame, whether that's upset around a certain person or a situation, whether it's a memory that's really sensory and something that brings us back into that moment and we start to feel it all over again. That in itself is adding further water into the stress bucket. So with that in mind, we just need to realise that our bucket is filling up all the time. Now, you can see the two taps that we've got at the bottom here. The taps are demonstrating that we need to be able to let some of that water out, because all of this stuff is just going to keep coming. And if we don't have any outlet, we will overflow. So the helpful coping mechanisms we'll come to in a moment, but what's happening is on the unhelpful coping mechanism, where you can see it's often where we do stuff to numb our feelings. So we'll probably exercise, but a little bit too much. We might indulge in alcohol or drugs if that's your thing. And there are more sinister and more upsetting and deeper, from a mental health standpoint, more challenging around sort of self-harm or taking risks. But that overeating, over drinking, over shopping, overdoing is a really common pattern for people, which is definitely an unhelpful way of coping with stress. Because start doing that all the time and your tolerance will increase and you'll end up at a place where it's quite unmanageable. That one glass of wine turns into two, turns into a bottle every night. And we have to get to a place where we're recognising that that isn't going to help us at all to recover from stress. So what they've done here is just to demonstrate that it's like putting your own little like little hose pipe, if you want, on the bottom of that tap, and all it's doing is giving you a short-term momentary relief feeling, only to compound and interrupt your sleep, interrupt your cognitive function, all the stress and the anxiety that comes from indulging too much in some of these areas will lead us into refilling our tank. So effectively, we're not turning that tap on, we're just finding another way for that water to get in there. And what we need to be doing when it comes to regulating stress is to really think about the helpful coping mechanisms. So getting that high quality sleep. What is your sleep hygiene like before you rest? If you're finding it really difficult to switch off, are you enabling your mind to do so even before you enter the bedroom? Thinking about being active, the best way to get out of your head is to get into your body. So, movement, whenever you're stressed or upset, and we'll come on to this in a moment, most of that is self induced. Most of what we feel is off the back of something we are thinking, and therefore we are in control of the thoughts and the thinking that we indulge in. And there's a very big distinction here that I really want you to listen to. There's a massive distinction between our thoughts and our thinking. So our thoughts will be, oh, God, work is so busy at the moment. That's a thought. That's okay to have in isolation. And the thinking from following that example would be, oh my God, work is so busy this week. I can't cope. I am so exhausted already. I've got enough on my plate. Nobody realizes how much they're asking of me. I don't have it in me to do anymore. I've got this to do and that to do. And to come to think of it, they never ask anyone else to take on extra work. Why am I the one having to do that? Is there nobody else that can stand up and do this? So straight away you can see that there's a story there. There's a element of, you know, conjecture, personal projection, personal ideals, personal, I guess the feeling of like it's your own version or your lens on what's happening, whereas the fact is it's busy at the moment. So when we can distinguish between our thoughts and our thinking, we're able to be very much more in a space where we can kind of be a bit more pragmatic and, I guess, clean our slate before we're entering a space of needing to rest. And that activity is really important from a stress hormone standpoint to help you release some of the stress, release some of the tension. Sleep, we want to be able to have good quality uninterrupted sleep, and that connection to others, that ability to feel like we belong and to understand there is hope, are such important drivers of our mental well-being. So important to feel that whether it's a phone call or a voice note, so much better than a text message or an email. So that human to human connection that we can have whenever possible is such a big thing. Now, there's one thing I'll also touch on here, and it's the third type of burnout that it links to as well. So we've talked about that bore out. We've talked about the frenetic burnout, that kind of high performing burnout, which is what we always see on TV, right? If someone's burning out, it's got to be because they're working all the hours, they never stop. And it's very much the media sensationalized view on burnout. But we've already discovered that there's bore out as well. And now I'm going to share with you that there's a third type of burnout called moral injury burnout. Or this can be referred to as worn out burnout. And what I mean by this is where we feel that our own values, the things that really we hold quite close to ourselves and our identity, and who we are, they are not aligned with the work that we're doing day to day. And when that happens, and when we feel from a value standpoint quite compromised around the work we're doing and where we're at, that can actually feel very, very real. That can lead to all of the signs and symptoms of burnout, because in its own right, it's a very strong, real experience. And I've actually been there in my career as well, where I've just felt like this is not for me anymore. I don't have the alignment from a personal value standpoint. It can become all consuming, and it begins to alter how you show up in your personal and professional life as well. So finding ways to live your values outside of your work, if you're already feeling that, do you know what, I'm not feeling quite aligned here, or I'm doing stuff that doesn't feel sit right with my values, if you can weave those into your personal life and your life outside of work, you will find the balance will tip a little bit more towards equilibrium. And we want you to be feeling where you've got that capacity to feel connected, of course, but also aligned with what matters to you, because that's really important, so that you don't end up in a space where you're mentally distancing from work, you're feeling brittle and burned out, and you're feeling quite stressed around it all because actually you no longer feel that this is the right thing for you. And it's not always ideal or possible to just change job like that. Believe me, I know. But what we can do is bring things in from outside of our work to help us get there as well. So let's take a look at one or two little tools and techniques that we can help with. So this is a 3B model. It's a great way to just really check in with yourself. What is it that my body behavior and bandwidth are telling me? Because once you can start to tune in, you can recognize where you're at, you'll be able to take early action, and that's really important. So from a body standpoint, you want to be able to notice what signs and signals your body is sharing with you way before your brain has caught up to where you're at from a stress standpoint. So are you noticing that you have quite a lot of tension here in your shoulders perhaps? Are you experiencing more than normal, quite strong headaches? Are you feeling that you've got that kind of anxious feeling in your stomach, those butterflies that don't feel good butterflies, if you know what I mean? So what are the signs that your body are giving you, and are you listening to them? And then from a behavior standpoint, be really honest with yourself and ask yourself, how am I showing up? Am I snappy? Am I being snappy with my partner? Am I being like really mean to my children? Am I not being particularly collaborative within the working environment? Am I finding that I'm really seething inwardly, even if I'm managing to hold it together and not show everyone else? Is that inner seething reaction to stuff kind of eating me up? Because that's a really big sign as well. So are you distancing from client events? Are you finding yourself unwilling to talk to your friends about what you're experiencing because you just don't have the energy to go there? But all of these behavioral signs will be very helpful for you to recognize that you've tipped into a place of strain. Potentially, if you've been there for some time, this could be some form of chronic stress as well. And very important to reel back. Think about yourself as the elastic band. What do I need to do in order to bring myself back? And from a bandwidth standpoint, I'm talking about cognitive bandwidth here. So what mental tabs have you got open and how many are there? What are you trying to do? Are you spreading yourself too thin? Always think it's valuable to use the filter do, delete, delay, or drop. What can I do? What can I delete? What can I delegate? And what can I drop? So you can kind of really use that filter to delegate off your plate what's not necessary, scrap anything that you don't really need to do. Definitely, focus in on doing what's high impact, high control, the stuff that we really want to be doing within the workplace, within the working day, but being really mindful that we only have a certain amount of energy and that energy needs to be managed, and we need to do so in a way that's going to be conducive towards minimizing the strain that can come from, the bandwidth is only so far. We can only go so far with this. And whenever you're doing anything like this and you're checking in with yourself, it's really good to, once you've done that exercise, whether you've jotted it down or just made mental notes, depending on your style, just to take a little moment to break the state. And we genuinely want to kind of micro reset here. We want to take a breath. We want to step away for 2 minutes. We want to switch tasks. We want to create a complete distinction in the context in which we're in order for us to be able to move forward with ease and with effect. Now, another tool which I thought I would add in today, because I just think it's so valuable, is something called the 90-second reset. And you might have heard of this before, and it actually comes from a lot of research and work by US neuroscientists. And this is quite freeing when you learn that actually the power sits with you. And I mean that, like, really the power around our own suffering sits with you. So something goes on at work. You've just submitted a piece of work and it has been ripped apart by your manager, and you are feeling quite raw. You have felt attacked, you felt upset, you feel whatever it might be, that feeling has swamped your whole nervous system. It's all you can feel. You can feel the colour in your cheeks, You can feel the fury in your head. You thought you were doing something brilliant, but actually it turns out it's not what was expected, and there's been a mismatch there for whatever reason. But there's a triggered response in the brain. The stress response is activated. There's a surge of chemicals that are released in our bodies. So you've got here the noradrenaline, and that causes the physical reactions we associate with stress. So think about the increased heart rate, the tense muscles, the clenched fists, the tight jaw, all of this, and sort of is a physical reaction to a stressed moment. Whether that's a thought or something that's happened, our body will react to it. But interestingly, that reaction and that chemical flush is done and dusted within 90 seconds. So the minute we've got to 90 seconds, our body has processed it, it's received all of the chemical flush, and it's got it out of our body. And that's quite amazing, right? That we can kind of go through something so upsetting, yet it can be, or it might not be upsetting, it might just be some form of emotional trigger, whatever it might be, but it can be removed from our body within 90 seconds. So then this is when we then have the chance to make a choice. And you have the power in every situation like this, because the physiological response has faded. So the choice here now is, do I choose to let this emotion pass? Let it pass? Or do I just want to continue on an emotional loop, letting this go over and over and again? And the best analogy here would be to imagine it like in your brain, this particular instance has now become a memory because it's in the past, and it's like we're putting it on the record player, letting it go round and around, and we're playing it over and over and over and again. So replaying those thoughts are then triggering the emotional reaction over and over and again. And actually, by not replaying it and not redoing it, we can free ourselves from that suffering. And this is a big example again of the distinction between thought and thinking, or event and kind of replaying what's happened. So the application is really simple. It's almost accepting and recognizing is the first step in a lot of things when it comes down to managing stress, is recognizing the emotion. We say name it to tame it for a reason. Name it, get it clear, what is it you're feeling? And once you've recognized that emotion, you just need to take a 90-second break, because you know that by the end of that, it will have been released. You want to be really mindful with your breathing. So definitely some form of box breathing, where you're breathing in for a count of 4, holding for a count of 4, breathing out for a count of 4, and then holding for a count of 4. And you can do that. If that's too much for you, just breathe in and then breathe out for a little bit longer than you breathe in. Like, really powerful, just doing that for 2, 3, 4 times, or as long as you need to do it. And then comes your conscious choice. You have the power within which you can choose to continue along that path, or to accept that that's happened, now I need to move. And I always think it's important to break the state, as shared before. So once you've done that, I would get up and I would move my body. I would get into fresh air, I would take those deep breaths outside, and I would be mindful that I have left this to one side, because there is research all around this whole reset that indicates the successfulness of how it actually works in practice. And it's almost like you're the ace in your back pocket, for you to remind yourself that you are always in control of how you recover when it comes to stress, and it's always within your power. It's your gift to be able to choose the next step you take. So to wrap up on this, we've recognized the shift, we understand the stress scale, we understand where we sit on the stress scale, and we're recognizing when we're shifting into a space that is more likely to be in the zone of strain, overwhelm, stress, chronic stress, or burnout. But knowing when we're making those shifts is exactly what we want to be doing. We then want to be able to regulate before we respond. So really thinking about the 3B model, really thinking about when it tips a bit too far, and how does that actually show up for me, for how I work, for how I think. And also being mindful of that image of the stress bucket, and the helpful ways of coping and the unhelpful ways of coping as well. And your energy is really key, and it's a session in its own right how we can really navigate energy and work on the high impact, high control tasks and really think about what we do to ensure that when we're coping with high levels of stress, we're doing it in a way that helps us replenish and, actually build in that recovery. There's been lots of reports, and McKinsey have done a really good one where they've actually analysed leaders, and those leaders who have taken those leaders who have taken it really seriously around their time to recover and have diary blocked recovery time within their working calendars day to day within the job, they have seen a 10 to 15% uplift in their performance purely by prioritizing rest and reprioritizing your energy, and thinking about energy management over time management is really important, but beyond the scope of today. But something to be mindful of: how am I managing my energy? How am I getting into my body when I'm in my head very much from a stress standpoint? And there begins the journey. So feel free to follow me on TikTok if you'd like to join in. There's lots of different strategies and tools that I bring across. You'll also have been hopefully connected with me on LinkedIn already. If not, you'll be getting an invite very shortly. And yeah, I'm really delighted that those of you that have been able to join me live and for staying this long, we're going to have so you're going to get a special bonus burnout toolkit with lots of opportunity for you to fill out and work on your own journey of stress and what you can actually do to make sure that that doesn't become your reality, because we don't want burnout to be real, because it is extremely preventable. So just quickly check in the chat if there's any questions. No, haven't seen anything come through. So thank you so much for your time. I'm really grateful. Oh, look, that's really nice. A great session. Thank you. Well done. That's great. Great, very insightful. Well, lovely. Lots of lovely thank yous coming through, nevertheless. But thank you for your time and your energy, and I'll be in touch very shortly. Take care. Bye bye.